Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm Connell, content producer for Mining Indaba. As part of our digital diary series and in keeping with this month's theme of artisanal mining, we're delighted to present an exciting new interview with David Sturmes, Director at the Impact Facility. In this interview, Mining Indaba Head of Content, Laura Cornish, and David talk about professionalisation rather than formalisation of the artisanal mining sector and look at the transition from artisanal mining to small-scale mining. Take a look.
David, it's so great to have you join me today.
My pleasure to be here, Laura. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, David, in previous conversations, you and I have spoken about professionalising rather than formalising the artisanal mining sector. What exactly do you mean by this?
Great. As we look at the artisanal and small-scale mining sector, there's a lot of informal activity that's going on. Under the perspective of the OECD and in other frameworks, much of it is legitimate mining, which we can explore further as part of this discussion. Some of it is illegal, but all of it is informal. And now it's about engaging with legitimate mining operations and trying to get them to go from being a subsistence activity to actually running the mines as SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's a change of mindset in how to run a business. It's a professionalization of the means that they deploy. And generally, it means that we create something that is more profitable, that is safer, and that's in line with the local regulatory requirements that there are. And so formalizing in isolation, usually this implies a taxation. It implies obligations on those smallholder producers, which are definitely a legitimate ask, but there is no carrot to that stick. And we believe that there's a lot of potential to increase health and safety, reduce environmental impacts, but also incentivize the formalization if the framing is broader. If we say, you're currently working with marginal means, let us help you pivot to a more professional way of working, and that implies formalization, but it suddenly creates something that's of interest to smallholder producers. So rather than trying to police them, it's about partnering with these organizations and helping fulfill the potential that they have as SMEs that contribute to the development of their communities.
Brilliant. David, I think I just want to get some clarity around when you have an artisanal mining site and what happens when it becomes a small-scale business or small-scale mining operation. What is the definition or the transition line between going from one to the other?
That's great. We often put them together, ASM, artisanal and small-scale mining. And that makes sense opposed to industrial mining or large-scale mining, LSM. But it's a huge spectrum that goes from artisanal on the one hand, that is defined as no mechanization in most mining codes, very makeshift, primitive means in how to operate, whereas small-scale mining implies semi-mechanized operations and a more professional setup. In some countries, this is a fluid definition within the mining code, so they also group artisanal and small-scale together. In others, there are restrictions that on artisanal mines, you're not allowed to use any machines, and then that actually creates a hurdle for the adoption of more advanced mining practices that could go hand in hand with productivity and health and safety improvements. But there's a shift here. Generally speaking, we have a spectrum that goes from artisanal to small scale. So with investments into better management systems, into more advanced machines, artisanal mining groups can be formalized into business structures that then would qualify as small scale mining operations. Sometimes that means a shift in the regulatory requirements, so applying for the right licenses, and there's more obligations on a small-scale mine than on an artisanal mine, but it often also comes with greater privileges or recognition as well, and that's important and something we incentivize.
Brilliant, David. I think that clarity was needed even for me, so glad to have it nice and defined. So, David, obviously now we're saying that this transition is really important and something we want to see within the artisanal mining sector. How do we achieve this? Obviously, it's an area of importance for the Impact Facility.
So generally speaking, we say for these businesses to professionalize, there's 3 elements to think about. It's a skills transfer. How can we give them access to the capacity, technical capacity that they need to manage the mine properly? It's access to capital and equipment. How can we give them the means necessary to do better? And access to markets. How can we allow them to participate in the formal economy? Because currently, most artisanal mining is excluded from formal supply chain channels, often even avoided. But we can only formalize their business if they have a formal channel to sell into as well, because otherwise we've created a business unit that checks all boxes and then they continue to sell into informal or even illicit supply chains. And so it's important that these 3 things come hand in hand. As the input facility, we try to look at these mining organizations as SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and really take an incubator approach, saying how can we help gain access to capacity, markets, and capital and equipment. In gold mining, we work across East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And what we've actually done is we've developed a leasing methodology for a lease to purchase program where miners now can access the equipment that is needed to do better, but by limiting the investment size to the performance level of their mine site, we at the same time incentivize ESG improvements. So how well you're performing determines how much of an investment you can access initially, and then as you do better through continuous improvement processes, you unlock eligibility for larger investments. And we've done this now with 10 mine sites across Kenya and Tanzania. We're looking to scale into Uganda. And initial investments are as small as $10,000, as big as $30,000 at the moment. And the idea is that that scales into larger brackets, where many of these SMEs that we work with, we believe could absorb several $100,000 of investment over time. But it's also about building a repayment track record, building mutual trust, and figuring out how the smallest possible investment could make the biggest possible difference, just to de-risk the engagement for both parties involved.
Well, David, you clearly have a track record which proves it can be done. So it will be exciting to see this rolled out on a greater scale across Africa. I'm just wondering, though, this is a phenomenal opportunity in this part of the mining industry, but there must be challenges associated with achieving this. What are those challenges and how do we mitigate as an industry against those?
Great. And just to reflect on how we're currently doing it, navigating some of those challenges, it's by relying on what we refer to as blended finance. So at the moment, the cost of identifying credible mine sites, engaging and de-risking the engagements by helping them improve bookkeeping, helping them look at production tracking and basic health and safety improvements prior to being able to make the investment, that is fairly cost and time intensive, and so we currently rely on donor financing to allow us to make those engagements, to build a pipeline, and then we work with private investors that have trusted us with their money to finance the lease equipment. The investors are looking for a moderate return on their investment, while the donors are there to de-risk the engagement and provide the capacity support necessary. And in most circumstances, this is if we want to be inclusive of many of those organizations that hold potential to be drivers and champions of development in their region, we do need that blended approach. So a commercial-only approach is going to be difficult, but we also hope that in the region we are building a new category of investment. Currently, formal financial actors are not engaging with the sector because of the lack of data, not being able to quantify risk and knowing how to engage. But as we build a track record with individual organizations, but also a portfolio at large, we're de-risking the sector for local actors. And so we hope to be a bridge solution in that. Challenges at a mine level individually are often around having the right licenses in place. That is obviously linked to the mining license, but also being registered as a business, having any environmental regulatory compliances that need to be in order to, for example, do cyanide leaching. But also having business literacy. even though they are running businesses, often with substantial revenue, if you look at it from a local context, they often don't have a profit and loss. They don't know clearly what their margins are, what their biggest cost items are. So it comes in to challenge this cowboy-like way of doing business, to saying, let's sit down, structure this, and actually look at what are your costs, what is your revenue, where can we improve margins most easily, because gold being a global commodity, we can't change the buying price, but we can change is the expenses that are linked to that. And so really at the local level, just a shift in mentality from day-to-day management to longer-term planning to monthly budgeting, etc. And that takes a bit of hand-holding initially, but we've seen that there's a lot of drive from our clients to actually take on that advice and get that free consulting on how to run their businesses better. And even a small community of practice where the minds share now information between one another and say, we've done this template or we've tried this and this works, and we've seen exchanges happening at that level. More globally, so away from the individual organization, there needs to be greater literacy with credit providing institutions on artisanal mining, and there needs to be clarity from a legal perspective specific to the national context when you can invest. Organizations like Trust Merchant Bank are doing fantastic work trying to de-risk investments into ASM. They've adjusted the entire risk screening process to actually be tailored to this sector. We can't treat it the same way we would treat a normal shop owner or an agricultural producer. There are things we need to factor in to build financial products that are fit for purpose, that take into account, especially at an artisanal small-scale mining level, the seasonality of what we're looking at. In areas with strong rainy seasons, mining stops for 2 or 3 months. How can we accommodate that without penalizing them for the seasonality of their work and indebting them to a point where they cannot recover from that? And then so it's figuring out how to build in the flexibility and that fit for purpose design, while still building something that ultimately will become economically viable, because it shouldn't be a charity case. It's literally a gold mine you're investing in. So there should be a return from the investment perspective, but we need products that are made specifically for that. It's a different beast, and we cannot treat it just the same as everything else.
David, wow. So many key words to take away from what you've just spoken about. For me, hand-holding, how important it is for the industry to be a hand-holder with artisanal miners and to take them to the next level. I think trust and how you build that together, and the finance and investment element and how that needs to be specifically catered towards this industry. And just the insight, David, is great. And clearly, even though it's a complex situation, companies such as the Impact Facility have done all the legwork, right? You've thought about it, you understand the nuances. And so, it makes sense to just work with businesses such as yours to figure this out. I think, in concluding, David, at the end of the day, why should industry support the objective to elevate artisanal miners, especially if they do, in essence, represent actually a threat to taking away pieces of their mining concessions? And I'm thinking, even at a small scale level, this might be an even greater risk. So why, David, why should they?
I think there has been a mentality shift that's very much dependent on what commodity you look at in terms of maturity, but a greater appreciation of artisanal mining as a livelihood that offers work to, I think, 48 million people based on the latest World Bank estimates across Africa and Asia, where a lot of the artisanal mining happens in or around industrial concessions. And it's important that we don't overgeneralize. Every country has a specific regulation and a different approach to artisanal mining. But in many countries, the mining code has failed to provide viable artisanal mine sites that are easily accessible to cooperatives. And that's where artisanal miners start operating on industrial concessions. This is a risk that is supposed to be taken seriously and is being taken seriously by most industrial miners, because in order to maintain a social license to operate, it's important to maintain positive community relations. At the end of the day, men and women working in the sector are members of the community around their concession. So it's about finding a constructive solution in engaging with these groups, sometimes informal, sometimes formalized groups that already operate there. And there's a spectrum of options that mines can engage with, industrial mines can engage with. On the more conservative side, that would include looking for economic alternatives. If people are currently mining on our concession or mining our tailings, the reason why they're doing that is that they're looking to make a living. Can we provide more economic employment opportunities in the region, either by having agricultural extension programs, which we've seen successful in some areas, or rethinking local content? How can we work with more SMEs around our concessions to provide uniforms, to provide different inputs, and then gradually onboard people into sectors that are different to the artisanal mining sector so that they have a viable alternative to fall back on? Then there's also a question of, can we actually help artisanal miners get a viable concession? So industrial miners have a big voice within the ministries of mines and should be advocates for saying, look, these guys are trying to make a living. In the absence of alternatives, this is the best thing they can do, but it shouldn't occur on our concession, for which we are responsible in terms of health and safety, environmental footprint, remediation, taxation, and everything. We would like to see more government action in creating viable mining zones for artisanal miners and potentially offer assistance in saying, if and when that move happens, we can help plan the new mine, or have a capacity skills transfer on health and safety or other practices that are transferable between industrial mining and small scale artisanal mining. And so being really a advocate and a promoter of legal and legitimate ASM to happen, but clearly distinguishing that from illegal activities that might occur on their concession and might put themselves, the artisanal miners, but also staff of the industrial mines at risk, because there are altercations and challenges if there is no regulation or agreement in place. And then at the most progressive end of the spectrum, and that might not be possible in many legal contexts, even exploring coexistence, saying, can we concede part of our concession, either subject to conditional offtake, so saying, mine here and we want to buy your materials to feed into our processes. There's some examples of that in South America, where industrial miners are purchasing doré from artisanal miners that work on their concession, or sacrificing part of the concession and not linking it to their own supply chain if that's considered too risky or not compatible with the requirements of the mining code. Where on that spectrum you fall is really up to the industrial miners to decide, and specific to the local context. But it is important that we have an ASM engagement strategy to avoid conflict and to ensure that those people, often very vulnerable people, can actually benefit from the mineral wealth in their region, not necessarily through direct exploitation, but by virtue of the support of the industrial miners that then try to find a constructive way forward. But it is challenging, and it often takes multi-stakeholder action. So it's not as easy as just asking industrial miners to fix it themselves. The government needs to have a leading position in this. And importantly, also downstream dictates what kind of engagement is possible. If an industrial miner decided to purchase ASM material today, some of their clients might not be aligned with this, or they might even have policies in place that state that there's no ASM material mixing into the supply chain. So it's about educating those stakeholders and encouraging them that proactive engagement with the sector is of mutual benefit.
Just another prime example of how important it is for all key stakeholders in the mining industry to work together for the benefit of all. David, it's been really insightful. I feel you've indicated just that there's a lot of positive that has been done in this regard. There's some clear leaders and how the industry should embrace this and make it part of their ultimate businesses and their strategic directions moving forward. I've really enjoyed our conversation, David. This is a subject clearly close to your heart, and I think it's becoming close to mine as well. Really, really appreciate your time to talk about such an important element of the mining industry.
No, it's my pleasure, and it's great that you highlight ASM this month. It's a part of the mining industry. It's here to stay, and millions of people depend on it, and that's a good thing. We can engage and provide safe, dignified working conditions, and really turn it into a driver of development. But there's a lot of challenges to navigate, and that's why it's important that we share proactively tools, approaches, successes, and failures, just to make sure that we speed up this process of professionalizing the sector as much as possible.